Snow falls without sound upon the battlements. It does not drift so much as descend with quiet intention, each pale fragment settling against iron helms and woolen cloaks stiff with frost. The men do not brush it away. They let it gather in the seams of their shoulders and the creases of their gauntlets, as if winter itself has laid a claim upon them. The wind prowls along the parapets like a restless spirit, tugging at banners that once blazed with a lion rampant in crimson pride. Now those same banners hang bleached and threadbare, their edges whispering against stone like the last breath of a wounded beast. Below, in the frozen fields, the siege engines crouch in patient silence. Mangonels crusted in ice, ladders half buried in drifts, ropes stiffened to the texture of bone. They resemble wooden creatures at rest, waiting for the command that will rouse them to violence. Even the earth seems to recoil from them, its furrows hardened into ridges of frost and shadow. Within the walls, smoke from tallow lamps and boiled barley rises into the dim winter sky, carrying with it a smell of survival, and beneath it, something sharper. Fear has its own scent. It seeps through arrow slits and creeps beneath doors. No winter wind can freeze it. In the keep's shadowed corridor stands Matthew, 17 years carved thin by hunger and expectation. He presses his palm against the cold stones as though listening for a heartbeat within them. The fortress is older than his grandfather's bones. Its walls were raised when this hill was still a contested marsh, when kings were crowned by steel and prayer in equal measure. Now it groans beneath the weight of a different trial. Matthew carries the banner of his Lord, fabric coarse and heavy, embroidered with a lion whose threads have faded from bright crimson to the dull shade of dried blood. His father carried the same banner at Kersey and never returned. His mother sold her wedding ring for a sack of rye the winter after. The boy remembers the sound of the gold leaving her hand more clearly than he remembers his father's voice. He stands beneath arrow slits carved for archers long dead. Through them he sees the enemy's campfires encircling the hill like a necklace of flame. They burn in careful intervals, disciplined and deliberate. The besieging army speaks another tongue, harsh syllables carried by the wind, unfamiliar and unyielding. They have cut the roads, they have salted the wells, their riders patrol the snow as if patrolling the edges of fate itself. Days ago, a parchment arrived beneath a flag of truce. Surrender. It promised in careful script, and your lives will be spared. Resist, and your children will belong to another crown. The lord of the castle keeps that parchment folded in his sleeve. He touches it sometimes when he thinks no one sees. Honor weighs differently when bellies are full. It becomes heavier when salted pork dwindles to gristle and bone. The grain stores are guarded like relics. Men whisper of rationing as if whispering of death. Before dawn each morning, the chaplain murmurs mass in Latin, breath visible as incense curls toward the rafters. His voice trembles not from doubt, but from cold. The words echo through the chapel, hollow and solemn, clinging to stone as though seeking refuge. Some of the soldiers kneel. Others remain standing, eyes closed, lips moving silently in private bargains with heaven. In the courtyard, the smith works by lantern light. He reshapes broken crossbow bolts, hammer striking anvil with a rhythm that rings like a bell tolling for the living. Sparks leap into the darkness and die against snow. Each strike is defiance. Each strike is a reminder that iron at least can be mended. Yet not all wounds yield to fire. In the infirmary, a child coughs blood into linen already stained with rust-colored blossoms. Winter sickness creeps through the keep like a quiet invader, claiming the smallest lungs first. A mother hums a lullaby that trembles at its edges. Hunger has hollowed her cheeks. Her song carries the thinness of hope stretched too far. Matthew hears it as he passes. He does not look inside. He fears that if he does, he will see his own childhood unraveling on that narrow cot. Instead, he climbs the battlements once more, boots crunching against frost. The horizon tilts beneath a veil of siege smoke. Somewhere beyond that gray veil lies a world where fields still bear wheat and rivers run unfrozen. But here, within these walls, time narrows to the space between assaults. The first stone from the trebuchet comes at noon. It arcs through the white sky with a sound like distant thunder, then shatters against the outer wall. Snow bursts upward in a cloud of shattered crystal. Men shout. Orders fly. Matthew feels the vibration travel through stone into bone. He tightens his grip on the banner and plants its staff against the parapet. He does not know why he does this. The banner is cloth and thread. It cannot stop stone. It cannot mend hunger. Yet when it lifts in the wind, snapping sharply against the pale sky, something stirs among the defenders. A murmur. A steadiness. Borders, he begins to understand, are not lines inked on parchment. They are wounds carved in stone and sealed with breath. They are promises men bleed to keep. The assault continues until dusk. Ladders scrape against walls. Arrows hiss like angry serpents. Boiling pitch pours in black ribbons over grasping hands. The snow becomes streaked with soot and crimson. When the attackers withdraw, dragging their wounded into the dark, silence returns. Not peace, but the exhausted quiet of men who have not yet fallen. That night, a storm rises. Wind howls across the hill, tearing at tents below and rattling shutters within. Snow thickens, blinding and wild. Somewhere in the chaos, a trebuchet rope snaps. Somewhere else, a rider loses his way, swallowed by white emptiness. And in the confusion, a gate hinge, already weakened by age and impact, shatters inward with a scream of splintering wood. For a heartbeat, the fortress holds its breath. Matthew is there when it happens. He had been sent to fetch water, banner slung over his shoulder like a burden too heavy for a boy. The hinge gives way, the gate yawning open just enough to invite disaster. Through the gap, shadows surge. He does not think of glory. He does not think of honor. He thinks only of the mother in the infirmary, of the chaplain's trembling Latin, of his own mother's bare hand without its ring. He plants the banner staff into the churned snow and braces it against the broken beam. Others follow, shoving timber and shields into the breach. The storm roars. Steel meets steel in flashes of silver. The banner, caught in the gale, lashes like a living thing. Then, as suddenly as it began, the surge falters. The storm blinds friend and foe alike. The attackers, disoriented, retreat to their campfires. The gate holds, barely. When dawn comes, it reveals a field reshaped by accident as much as valor. The shattered hinge lies half buried. The enemy's siege engine stands crippled by frozen rope. A rider's body is found miles away, his message undelivered. Matthew stands among the survivors, fingers numb, eyes rimmed with smoke and sleeplessness. He has not become a hero. He has not slain a king. He has simply remained standing when others might have fallen. He does not yet know that kingdoms are often rewritten this way, not by grand design, but by moments of fragile endurance. By boys who hold fast to fabric and wood while storms decide the rest. The Lord still weighs honor against hunger. The enemy still encircles the hill. Winter has not loosened its grip. But something has shifted. The banner, though torn, still flies, and as snow begins to fall again, soft, relentless, indifferent, Matthew senses that this siege is not merely a battle for stone walls. It is a crucible in which the meaning of loyalty itself is being reforged. Beyond the smoke, beyond the frozen fields, another decision gathers like a storm not yet seen. Allies may ride, betrayal may bloom, or famine may do what steel could not. For now, the fortress breathes. For now, the boy remains. And in the hush between one snowfall and the next, the fate of a kingdom waits, balanced not upon a throne, but upon the trembling hands of those who refuse to let the banner touch the ground. At dawn, the bell in the chapel tower cracks. Its voice, once round and solemn, splits beneath the cruelty of cold. The sound that follows is thin and fractured, a broken note drifting over the valley like a prayer abandoned mid-sentence. Men on the battlements pause, heads lifting toward the sound. Even the enemy fires below seem to flicker in hesitation. The bell had marked births, deaths, victories, and feasts. Now it speaks only of fracture. Frost has crept into the mortar of the fortress walls, widening hairline seams into jagged veins. Stone that once seemed eternal now carries the pale scars of winter. The keep groans in its sleep, timbers tightening and splitting with soft reports that echo through corridors like distant knuckles against a coffin lid. From the orchard below, once heavy with autumn apples that bent the branches into sweet submission, only blackened limbs remain. Foragers stripped what they could before the siege tightened its fist. What the soldiers did not take, hunger did. What hunger spared, war burned. The trees stand skeletal against the whitening sky, their branches clawing upward as if begging the heavens to remember them. 4 months. 4 months of tightening belts and thinning hope. Bread is stretched with ground acorns and sawdust, its bitterness hidden poorly beneath prayers of gratitude. In the kitchens, nettle broth boils in iron cauldrons that hiss like restrained serpents. The steam smells of earth and desperation. Children sip from wooden cups and pretend not to taste the bark. Within these walls, survival has become an art of subtraction. Lady Isabeau moves through the keep with keys at her girdle, their iron teeth clinking softly against her hip like a rosary of responsibility. Widow of the garrison's former commander, she did not ask for command, yet command has settled upon her shoulders as winter settles upon the stones, uninvited and inescapable. She speaks Norman French in the hall when she must remind the knights of their oaths, Latin to the priest when faith requires the language of heaven, and the rough dialect of the villagers when she kneels among them in the lower chambers, distributing the last sacks of oats with hands that no longer tremble. Her father's voice carries through stone corridors, measured, strained. The envoys sent beneath flags of truce speak of treaties and dowries, of alliances sealed not by swords, but by vows murmured before altars. Their words are smooth, polished by repetition. Peace can be purchased, they say, at a cost. Eloan slips from her chamber and moves down the corridor, bare feet silent against cold flagstones. She pauses behind a carved wooden screen in the council chamber, its pattern of vines and leaves casting fragile shadows across her face. Through its lattice, she sees her father. The Castellan stands straight despite the weight pressing upon him. His beard has grown streaked with gray since the siege began. His hands rest upon the trestle table where maps lie faded and worn. The envoys speak of her, not by name at first, only as the daughter, as the suitable bride, as the bond between rival crowns. They speak of lands restored, of bloodshed ended, of a frontier secured by matrimony rather than massacre. Eloan's fingers trace the carved vines of the screen. She understands. Her body may become a bridge across which armies no longer march. Her hand may be bartered to seal peace where swords have failed. She has read enough chronicles to know this is not uncommon. Queens and daughters have long been parchment upon which kingdoms redraw themselves. Her father's voice falters only once. And if she refuses, he asks. One envoy smiles faintly. Refusal is a luxury of those not encircled. Silence settles thick as dust. Eloan feels something shift within her. Not fear alone, but clarity. The siege has not only threatened stone and soil, it has reached into chambers and futures, into the quiet spaces where childhood once lingered. Outside, the valley lies still beneath a sky not yet touched by dawn. Then, without herald or omen, the night tears open. A flare of orange against black, a sudden roar carried by wind. An overturned brazier in a tent heavy with oilcloth becomes a spark. That spark becomes a flame. Canvas drinks fire as greedily as dry straw. Wind rises, feeding it, pushing it from tent to tent in a ravenous leap. Shouts erupt in the enemy camp. Not ordered cries, but fractured panic. Horses rear against their tethers. Men scramble half-armored, tripping over guy ropes and fallen poles. Fire climbs higher, devouring banners and supplies alike. From the battlements, the sentries stare in disbelief. Within the fortress, bells begin to ring, Not in alarm, but in opportunity. Their fractured tones slice through the dawn's first gray light. The Castellan turns from the council table to the gate. "Now," he says. The portcullis rises with a groan that echoes like a creature waking from hibernation. Soldiers surge forward, faces lit by the reflected blaze below. There is no time for strategy, only for instinct. They charge into chaos. Smoke stings eyes and throat. Embers whirl in the wind like furious fireflies. The besiegers, disoriented and divided, struggle to form ranks. Steel meets steel amid collapsing tents and splintering beams. The smell of burning oil and singed wool thickens the air. Eloan stands upon the battlement beside her father, heart pounding as she watches men clash in the valley that once knew only harvest. The battle is brief. Fire consumes more than blades can. The enemy's ambition, so carefully arrayed over months, dissolves in a single night of wind-fed flame. By the time dawn spreads pale light across the hills, the besieging army is in retreat, dragging wounded and pride alike away from the charred remains of their camp. The valley is quiet, but for the crackle of dying embers. Smoke coils upward into a paling sky, thin and mournful. Shields lie discarded among blackened timbers. The frost that once webbed the arrow slits now melts in hesitant droplets. Eloan stands beside her father on the rampart. He rests one hand upon the stone, the other upon the hilt at his side. For a long moment, neither speaks. Chronicles will be written. Within the keep, nettle broth still boils. The physician still tends his patients. The mercenaries still count their coins. The siege is not over. But something has changed. The enemy has tasted vulnerability. The defenders have tasted reprieve. And in that fragile space between disaster and deliverance, decisions will soon be made, alliances tested, loyalties bartered, perhaps even betrayals sealed in quiet chambers where keys hang heavy at a widow's side. Lady Isabeau lifts her gaze beyond the valley toward distant roads now softened by thaw. Somewhere out there, riders may be gathering. Somewhere, a rival lord may weigh advantage against obligation. Somewhere, a message may yet slip through. The bell may be cracked. The walls may be veined with frost. But the fortress breathes. And as the river carves a new path through mud and ruin, so too does fate begin to carve a new course for those within these walls, one that will demand not only endurance, but choice. The air smells of pitch and wet wool as arrows arc across the dark like brief, dying constellations. They rise with a hiss and vanish in showers of sparks against stone. For a heartbeat, each one paints the sky with fire, then disappears, leaving only smoke and the echo of impact. Somewhere beyond the walls, a horse screams, a high, fractured sound that does not belong to any beast of field or stable. It sounds almost human. It clings to the night long after it fades. Torches gutter in iron brackets along the battlements, their flames bending low beneath gusts of wind. Smoke smears the stars into gray streaks. The sky itself seems bruised. Within the fortress chapel, candles tremble before a painted Madonna whose gilded halo has begun to flake. Gold leaf peels away like memory from an old wound. A monk bends over his desk, cramped fingers wrapped around a quill, copying psalms by the unsteady light. Ink thickens at the nib, freezing in the chill air. He breathes upon it and writes again, as if words themselves might fortify stone. Outside, the trebuchet groans. They have given it a name, one whispered by sentries with a mixture of dread and superstition. A demon's name. Its long arm rises and falls with terrible patience. Each release is a thunderclap. Each stone arcs into the night and crashes against the curtain wall with a shudder that travels through mortar and marrow alike. Among the defenders stands Tomas. He is no knight, no son of a heraldic line. His hands are broad and whitened by lime dust. His trade is mortar and measure, plumb line and chisel. When the first enemy banners appeared on the horizon months ago, he was lifting stone to repair a storm-cracked parapet. Now he lifts a spear. He stands shoulder to shoulder with men whose spurs jingle against the flagstones. Their armor gleams dully in firelight, but Tomas's tunic is stiff with dried slurry and sweat. He has walked these ramparts since boyhood, carrying wicker baskets of lime, patching frost splits, sealing hairline cracks before rain could find them. He knows these walls as others know their wives' faces. He knows where damp gathers. He knows which stones were replaced in haste after last spring's storm. He knows where the parapet sags beneath too much weight, where arrow slits narrow too sharply for a clear shot. He feels the tremor of impact differently than the knights do. They hear thunder. He hears strain. The siege has turned time viscous. Saints' days pass unmarked. The chaplain's calendar curls unused at the edges. Saltfish is rationed to a thumb's width. Children are sent into the cellars to grind barley, their small arms turning heavy stones while the air tastes of mold and damp straw. Their laughter, once bright in the courtyard, has thinned into whispers. In the lower quarters, a mother braids her daughter's hair by candlelight and tells her stories of summers before war. The girl asks if apples will ever grow again in the orchard below. The mother does not answer. Outside, the attackers chant in a language Tomas barely understands. Their voices rise and fall like a tide pressing against rock. They beat their shields in rhythm with the drum. The sound seeps into sleep. It becomes the pulse beneath every thought. The demon engine groans again. A stone strikes the wall not 20 paces from where Tomas stands. Mortar bursts outward in a spray of grit and dust. The impact shakes him to his knees. He presses his palm against the fractured seam and feels it, the subtle give, the weakness spreading like a bruise. He says nothing at first. Knights shout. Orders are given. Buckets of sand are passed hand to hand. The breach is patched in darkness with frozen fingers and muttered curses. Yet Tomas feels something else beneath the noise. Not despair. Not yet. Opportunity. He has watched the enemy set their machine upon a rise beyond the eastern ditch, a place that seems firm beneath frost, yet he remembers it from childhood. Beneath that ground run hidden springs, thin veins of water that never truly dry. In summer they bloom with reeds. In winter, they harden only at the surface. Each time the trebuchet's arm falls, the frame shudders deeper into the softened earth. Rain begins at dusk. At first a whisper against stone, then a steady drumming. By midnight it falls in sheets, cloaking the valley in silver noise. Thunder rolls across the hills, swallowing smaller sounds. Sentries hunch beneath cloaks, eyes narrowed against the torrent. Tomas finds the captain beneath the gatehouse, studying a crude map by lantern light. "My lord," he says, voice steady, despite the tremor in his bones. The ground beneath their engine is false. It drinks water. Tonight it will drink deeply. The captain looks at him, at the lime-burned hands, the mortar stains, the mason's apron still tied at his waist. "You are certain?" Tomas nods. "I laid stone near there once. I know the breath of that soil." There is a pause long enough for thunder to speak again. Then the captain gestures toward the shadows, the postern gate. It has been sealed for years, its hinges rusted, its arch half-buried in ivy and neglect. Few remember it exists. Tomas does. He helped patch its lintel when he was 14. Now, beneath the cloak of storm, a handful of men gather. Torches are wrapped in oilcloth to shield their flames. Faces are smeared with ash. No trumpets sound. No banners rise. The postern groans as it opens, a narrow mouth in the wall. Rain lashes their faces as they slip into darkness. Mud swallows their boots at once. The enemy camp is chaos. Tents sagging, ropes straining, guards cursing as they fight the weather. The great trebuchet looms ahead, its frame already listing slightly, wheels half sunk into the ground. Tomas feels his heart pound against his ribs like a mallet against stone. They move quickly. Oil is poured along the undercarriage beams. Ropes are hacked and severed. A spark catches. For a moment, nothing. Then flame blossoms. It crawls hungrily along soaked timber, finding dry veins within the rope. Smoke billows upward, thick and acrid. The demon engine groans once more, but this time in agony. Its arm sags. A wheel collapses inward as the softened earth gives way. Shouts erupt in the alien tongue. Confusion spreads faster than fire. Thunder swallows their retreat as the small band races back through mud and rain, slipping through the postern just as enemy figures crest the rise. By dawn, smoke coils where the engine once stood. The field beyond the wall is scarred black, the charred skeleton of timber jutting from churned earth. The chanting has ceased. The drums are silent. The enemy lines shift backward, not in panic, but in uncertainty. Within the fortress, no great cheer rises. The defenders are too tired for that, too hollow. Yet something unseen has changed. A weight lifted not from the body, but from the spirit. The wall still stands. The demon is ash. Tomas returns to the battlements, pressing his palm once more against stone. He feels no tremor now. Only dampness. Only endurance. Months later, when peace is declared, not with trumpets, but with weary signatures and redrawn lines on brittle parchment, Tomas stands again with trowel in hand. He patches the scars left by stone and fire. He mixes mortar in the same courtyard where arrows once fell like stars. The orchard will grow again, though slower. The chapel bell will be recast, though never quite the same. And as he smooths fresh mortar into fractured seams, he understands something few chronicles will record. A kingdom's line shifted not because of prophecy, nor because of crown or sainted relic. It shifted because he knew the softness of soil, because he remembered the patience of rain. Because in a night of thunder and fear, a mason trusted what his hands had always known. The walls stand quieter now. The river runs clear. Children's laughter hesitantly returns to the courtyard. Yet Tomas sometimes pauses in his work and looks toward the valley where the demon engine once stood. He knows how easily ground can soften, how swiftly strength can sink. Peace, like mortar, must be tended before cracks widen. And as clouds gather again beyond the hills, distant, dark, unclaimed, he senses that kingdoms, like walls, are never finished. They are only ever held together by those who notice where the strain begins. The river does not move. It lies beneath the citadel like a sheet of dull silver, its current trapped under glassy silence. What once murmured and curled now holds its breath. Frost feathers the surface in pale veins, delicate as cracks in porcelain. Ravens gather along the ice, black commas against a blank winter page, tilting their heads as if reading a sentence no human hand has written. On the highest tower, a sentry stamps his boots against stone worn smooth by generations of watchmen. The cold gnaws through leather and wool, seeking bone. He presses his gloved hands beneath his arms and scans the valley below. The enemy camp has spread like spilled ink across the frozen earth. Tents cluster in dark shapes against snow. Smoke rises in thin blue ribbons from cook fires where millet porridge thickens in dented pots. Even from this height, the sentry imagines he can smell it. Grain, ash, hunger no less real than his own. The river between them gleams with false serenity. Within the fortress walls, Brother Anselm bends over a pallet of straw in the infirmary. The air there is heavy with sweat, iron, and sour wine. The siege has filled every inch of space, men pierced by quarrels that snapped like winter twigs, boys fevered from tainted water drawn from half-frozen wells, women weakened by rations, shaved thinner with each passing week. He washes wounds with wine gone sharp in the barrel. He binds them with linen torn from altar cloths whose embroidered saints now lie in strips around broken limbs. The gold thread catches candlelight even in ruin. He has seen plague before. He recognizes the swelling at the neck, the heat that rises without mercy, the dull glaze in a patient's eye. He prays in Latin beneath his breath, words shaped by centuries, but his hands work in silence. Faith may fortify the soul. It does not cauterize flesh. Outside, the bell in the cracked chapel tower remains mute. Snow falls in brief flurries, then stops. The cold holds. The besieging Lord has sent another offer. Safe passage, it promises, in exchange for surrender. Lay down your banners, open your gates, and no blood need spill. The parchment is smooth. the script elegant. But between the lines lies a different truth. He intends to redraw the frontier river as his own, annexing villages that have sworn fealty for generations, farms that have paid their tithe to the citadel since their grandfathers' grandfathers broke the soil. In the great hall, beneath rafters darkened by centuries of smoke, the council debates, breath clouds in the air as arguments rise and fall. Honor weighs against survival. One knight speaks of lineage and oath, of banners carried through past wars. Another speaks more quietly of children in the cellars who grind barley until their small wrists ache. Lady Isabeau stands near the hearth, its coals burning low. She listens without interruption. She has melted silver and unraveled tapestries. She has watched soldiers grow hollow-eyed. She knows that walls can be rebuilt. Blood cannot be reclaimed. The granaries are nearly bare. Rats scurry bold as merchants, their whiskers twitching in open defiance. Hunger has stripped dignity from both man and beast. Beyond the north wall, the frozen river glints like opportunity. It is the sentry who notices movement first. A darker ripple upon the pale sheet. Torches hooded low. Figures advancing where no advance should be possible. The enemy has chosen patience over pride. If the river is solid, it is no longer a boundary. It is a bridge. The sentry leans forward, heart thudding against ribs. He sees them now, armored silhouettes stepping carefully across the ice, ropes coiled at their belts, ladders borne low. Their breath plumes white in the night. Below, the current presses unseen against its glassy prison. Within the infirmary, Brother Anselm hears something distant, a muffled crack, sharp and unnatural. He pauses, hand suspended above a fevered brow. Another crack follows, louder, a sound like cannon fire tearing through stone. On the tower, the sentry's breath catches. The ice shudders. What seemed immutable begins to fracture in jagged lines racing outward like lightning trapped beneath glass. One armored figure drops to a knee, another lunges forward. The torches flare wildly as balance falters. Then, the river remembers itself. With a roar that splits the valley, the surface gives way. Ice collapses into black water. Men vanish mid-stride, swallowed whole. Torches hiss and die in bursts of steam. The current surges up through broken shards, dragging bodies beneath with merciless indifference. Cries rise, sharp and brief. Armor becomes an anchor. Gauntleted hands claw at slick edges that crumble under desperate grip. The river, once frozen in obedience, now devours without prejudice. On the walls, defenders gather in stunned silence. No arrow is loosed. No cheer escapes their lips. They watch as chaos blooms across the ice. The besieging camp erupts in confusion. Shouts in a foreign tongue slice the night. Ropes are thrown too late. A horse rears at the riverbank, eyes white with terror. The current carries splintered ice and flailing limbs downstream, vanishing into shadow. In the infirmary, Brother Anselm closes his eyes and whispers a psalm, not for victory, but for the drowning. He knows too well the cold bite of water filling lungs. He knows the helpless thrash that becomes stillness. By dawn, the river lies broken and jagged, its surface a mosaic of ruin. Ravens circle above, then descend cautiously to the edges where debris is gathered. Smoke from the enemy camp rises thin and mournful. No drums sound. The besieging lord has withdrawn his men from the riverbank. His tents shift farther back from the treacherous edge. Grief travels through his ranks like frost through mortar. He is lost not to blade nor to strategy, but to the unseen strength of frozen water. Within the citadel, the council reconvenes. No proclamation is made. No banner raised higher than before. The frontier remains as it was, held not by sermon nor by sword, but by a river that chose its own allegiance. Lady Isabeau steps onto the battlement as morning light spreads across fractured ice. The sentry stands beside her, eyes still fixed on the valley. Neither speaks. Below, the river flows once more beneath its shattered skin, restless and unclaimed. Brother Anselm moves among his patients, adjusting bandages, offering water in careful sips. He has seen men die by steel and by sickness. Now he has seen men claimed by silence. The siege continues. The granaries are still bare, the rats still prowl, the enemy banners still mark the valley like stubborn stains. But something intangible has shifted. The besiegers have tasted uncertainty. The defenders have witnessed a force beyond command. The river has reminded them all that borders are illusions traced upon earth that answers to no lord. As evening falls, the broken ice glows faintly beneath a pale sun. Ravens lift and settle again, their dark forms stitching the sky to the water below. The sentry pulls his cloak tighter and looks beyond the valley, where distant hills fade into gray. Somewhere beyond them, new decisions gather, perhaps reinforcements, perhaps betrayal, perhaps a different kind of storm. The river flows on, indifferent to banners and blood alike. And in its cold, relentless current, the next chapter of this struggle begins to stir. Quiet as frost, patient as water, waiting for the moment when certainty cracks once more. Wind rattles the shutters of the keep, sharp and restless, carrying with it the metallic scent of impending snow. It slips through every seam in the stone, fingers of cold probing tapestries and hearths alike. The sky above the fortress is a hard, colorless dome, as if the world itself has grown tired of spectacle. In the courtyard, a warhound gnaws at a bone stripped nearly white, its jaws working with stubborn rhythm. The sound of teeth against brittle marrow echoes faintly against the walls. Stable boys brush frost from the flanks of gaunt horses whose ribs show like the hoops of empty barrels. Their breath rises in pale clouds, mingling with the thin smoke from dwindling fires. The siege has outlasted autumn's gold and winter's first fury. What remains is a brittle stillness, a silence stretched too tight, like breath held too long beneath cold water. Sir Aldrich stands in the great hall before a trestle table scarred by years of feasts and councils. A vellum map lies spread before him, its edges curled, its ink bleeding where damp has kissed it too often. He traces the faded line of the realm with a gloved finger, following the border as it bends along the river and crosses the narrow strip of fertile land beyond these walls. He knows what the enemy desires. Not merely the castle, not merely the banner. They want the wheat fields that shimmer gold each harvest, the toll bridge that swallows coin from every passing merchant, the steady flow of taxes collected in sack and wheel and bolt, rye bundled tight, cheese pressed, and salted undyed wool folded into tribute. This fortress is the lock. The land beyond is the treasure. To lose this place would be to starve the treasury as surely as any granary here. His men gather around him, shadows cast long by torches stubbed short to conserve wax. Chainmail hangs loose on shoulders thinned by rationing. Leather belts have been drawn tighter, notch by notch. Crossbows are restrung with sinew scraped from slaughtered cattle, the smell of cured hide lingering in the corridors. They do not complain. But their eyes have grown older. In the chapel, prayers are offered in hushed tones. Candles burn low, their flames trembling as though aware of their own fragility. The chaplain's voice carries softly through stone arches, words rising toward a ceiling blackened by centuries of smoke. Each prayer is less a plea for victory than for endurance. Rumor drifts through the keep like smoke through rafters. Reinforcements delayed by floodwaters miles away. A bridge washed out. A convoy turned back by swollen marshlands. Hope flickers like a wick near its end, brief, fragile, easily extinguished. Beyond the walls, the enemy remains patient. Their banners hang steady in the wind. Their cookfires burn each night with unwavering regularity. They have settled into the siege as one settles into a season, confident that time is their ally. Sir Aldrich knows time cuts both ways. He has sworn to defend this border in his king's name, but oaths weigh heavier when men grow hollow. He walks the ramparts at dusk, pausing to look beyond the valley toward the distant road that winds through low hills and marshland. He sees nothing. Only fog clinging to the earth like a second skin. Then, on a morning veiled in that same fog, the horns sound. Sharp. Uncertain. Not the deep, measured call of the besiegers. Something different. a stuttering note that rises and falters. Men on the battlements freeze. Sir Aldrich turns toward the sound, heart striking once, hard against his ribs. Through the mist along the distant road, shapes begin to emerge, shadows moving against shadows. Horses stepping cautiously, riders scanning unfamiliar ground. Reinforcements lost for weeks in swollen marshlands have stumbled upon the enemy's unguarded flank. They were never meant to arrive here. Floodwaters had scattered their path. Guides misjudged the terrain. Patrols wandered beyond mapped certainty. Yet by misdirection and misfortune, they have appeared where the besieging lord felt most secure. In the enemy camp, confusion ripples like wind through dry grass. Tents shift. Banners pivot. Orders are shouted in urgent tones. Soldiers scramble to form ranks against a threat they had not anticipated. Sir Aldrich does not hesitate. He does not consult the map again. He does not weigh omens. Open the gates, he commands. The portcullis rises with a groan that echoes like a beast waking from slumber. The defenders surge forward, not in parade formation, but in raw, desperate unity. Boots strike frozen ground, shields lock. Crossbows snap into place. They crash into the weakened edge of the encirclement like cloth split under blade. The battle is brief. There is no grand maneuver, no elaborate feint. Only the violent collision of exhaustion and surprise. Reinforcements press from one side, the fortress defenders from the other. The enemy, caught between hammer and anvil, falters. Steel rings against steel, mud splashes red and brown alike. A banner falls, trampled beneath boots that no longer distinguish allegiance from survival. By midday, the valley is a churned tapestry of broken pikes and discarded shields. Smoke from abandoned cookfires drifts sideways in the wind. The besieging lord's army begins its withdrawal, not a rout, but a retreat born of fractured confidence. Sir Aldrich stands upon the rampart as the last of the enemy banners recede toward the hills. No cheer rises from the walls. The men are too weary for triumph. They lean upon their spears and breathe the cold air deeply, as if relearning how to fill their lungs without fear of smoke or arrow. The fertile strip beyond the fortress lies untouched, wheat stubble frozen beneath pale light. The toll bridge stands silent, its planks worn but unbroken. For now, the treasury will not starve. Sir Aldrich knows the chronicles will be written differently. They will speak of courage and swift command, of valor at the decisive hour, of a border held firm by noble resolve. They will not speak of a patrol's wrong turn in flooded marshland, of fog thick enough to hide an army until it was too late, of a siege dissolved not by brilliance, but by the fragile hinge of chance. He rests his hands upon the cold stone of the parapet and looks toward the valley, where ravens already gather among the scattered remnants of war. Borders, he understands, are inked not only by kings and councils, but by accident and weather, by missteps and mist. The fortress breathes easier now. Granaries will fill again. Horses will regain flesh. Candles will burn longer in the chapel. Yet as twilight settles over the valley and snow begins to drift once more from a sky the color of ash, Sir Aldrich feels a quieter truth beneath the relief. If a kingdom can be saved by a wrong turn and a fog bank, it can just as easily be undone by them. The wind rattles the shutters again, softer now. Beyond the hills, beyond the marshlands, new roads twist through uncertain ground. And somewhere in that shifting landscape of mud and memory, the next test of this border has already begun to gather. Silent as snow, patient as history. Waiting for the moment when breath is once again held too long. Before sunrise, the fortress is wrapped in a silence so complete it feels consecrated. No drumbeat from the valley. No groan of siege engines. Even the wind seems to kneel. Frost webs the arrow slits in delicate filigree, as if winter itself has etched prayers into stone. The air tastes of iron and old smoke, a flavor that lingers on the tongue like memory. Somewhere deep within the granary, there is the faint rustle of mice among dwindling grain, small lives thriving in the shadow of greater desperation. A single candle burns in the chamber of Elowin, daughter of the Castellan. Its flame bends toward the draft, slipping beneath her door, thin and persistent. The wax pulls slowly at its base, surrendering itself in silence. She sits beside it, knees drawn close, listening to the hush that presses against the walls. She has grown up within this fortress. Her earliest memories are of the chapel's incense drifting like golden mist beneath painted saints, of a psalter illuminated in lapis and gold, its pages cool beneath her fingertips as she learned to read the sacred syllables, of embroidery frames set beneath tapestries that depicted martyrs serene in suffering, halos bright above faces untouched by fear. Now she watches war through those same narrow windows. She sees men die in the fields where she once gathered wildflowers. She hears the thud of catapults in the same courtyard where she once chased doves. The siege has stolen her girlhood without ceremony. In its place, it has given her the smell of burning pitch and the knowledge that walls are not invincible. Below her chamber, the council gathers. Her father's voice carries through stone corridors, measured, strained. The envoys sent beneath flags of truce speak of treaties and dowries, of alliances sealed not by swords, but by vows murmured before altars. Their words are smooth, polished by repetition. Peace can be purchased, they say, at a cost. Eloan slips from her chamber and moves down the corridor, bare feet silent against cold flagstones. She pauses behind a carved wooden screen in the council chamber, its pattern of vines and leaves casting fragile shadows across her face. Through its lattice, she sees her father. The Castellan stands straight despite the weight pressing upon him. His beard has grown streaked with gray since the siege began. His hands rest upon the trestle table where maps lie faded and worn. The envoys speak of her, not by name at first, only as the daughter, as the suitable bride, as the bond between rival crowns. They speak of lands restored, of bloodshed ended, of a frontier secured by matrimony rather than massacre. Eloan's fingers trace the carved vines of the screen. She understands. Her body may become a bridge across which armies no longer march. Her hand may be bartered to seal peace where swords have failed. She has read enough chronicles to know this is not uncommon. Queens and daughters have long been parchment upon which kingdoms redraw themselves. Her father's voice falters only once. And if she refuses, he asks. One envoy smiles faintly. Refusal is a luxury of those not encircled. Silence settles thick as dust. Eloan feels something shift within her. Not fear alone, but clarity. The siege has not only threatened stone and soil, it has reached into chambers and futures, into the quiet spaces where childhood once lingered. Outside, the valley lies still beneath a sky not yet touched by dawn. Then, without herald or omen, the night tears open. A flare of orange against black, a sudden roar carried by wind. An overturned brazier in a tent heavy with oilcloth becomes a spark. That spark becomes a flame. Canvas drinks fire as greedily as dry straw. Wind rises, feeding it, pushing it from tent to tent in a ravenous leap. Shouts erupt in the enemy camp. Not ordered cries, but fractured panic. Horses rear against their tethers. Men scramble half-armored, tripping over guy ropes and fallen poles. Fire climbs higher, devouring banners and supplies alike. From the battlements, the sentries stare in disbelief. Within the fortress, bells begin to ring, not in alarm, but in opportunity. Their fractured tones slice through the dawn's first gray light. The Castellan turns from the council table to the gate. Now, he says. The portcullis rises with a groan that echoes like a creature waking from hibernation. Soldiers surge forward, faces lit by the reflected blaze below. There is no time for strategy, only for instinct. They charge into chaos. Smoke stings eyes and throat. Embers whirl in the wind like furious fireflies. The besiegers, disoriented and divided, struggle to form ranks. Steel meets steel amid collapsing tents and splintering beams. The smell of burning oil and singed wool thickens the air. Eloan stands upon the battlement beside her father, heart pounding as she watches men clash in the valley that once knew only harvest. The battle is brief. Fire consumes more than blades can. The enemy's ambition, so carefully arrayed over months, dissolves in a single night of wind-fed flame. By the time dawn spreads pale light across the hills, the besieging army is in retreat, dragging wounded and pride alike away from the charred remains of their camp. The valley is quiet, but for the crackle of dying embers. Smoke coils upward into a paling sky, thin and mournful. Shields lie discarded among blackened timbers. The frost that once webbed the arrow slits now melts in hesitant droplets. Elowen stands beside her father on the rampart. He rests one hand upon the stone, the other upon the hilt at his side. For a long moment, neither speaks. Chronicles will be written. They will speak of valor and divine favor, of banners upheld against overwhelming odds, of a castle saved by courage and righteous resolve. They will not dwell upon an overturned brazier. They will not recount the careless spark, the sudden gust of wind that chose one direction over another. They will not record how chance, for one fragile night, leaned toward those within these walls. Elowen watches the smoke fade into morning. She knows that her fate may still be bartered in quieter rooms, that peace may yet demand her hand, though not under threat of fire. The siege may have broken, but the politics that birthed it endure. The border remains intact. The fertile lands beyond will see spring again. The toll bridge will collect coin. The granaries will refill. Yet she understands something deeper than the envoys ever intended. Kingdoms survive not solely by sharpened steel or solemn vow. They endure because fate, weather, and human folly intertwine in ways no counsel can predict. The candle in her chamber will burn again tonight. The frost will return to the arrow slits. The ravens will circle above fields newly scarred. And somewhere beyond the hills, new ambitions will gather like storm clouds over distant marsh. Elowen turns from the valley and walks back toward the keep, her shadow long against the stone. For though the siege has ended, the fragile dance between power and chance continues, silent as drifting ash, patient as wind, waiting for the next spark to test the strength of walls and the resolve of those who stand behind them. A thin rain falls like ash from a sky the color of old iron. It does not drum or roar. It seeps. It settles into cloak and beard, into leather seams and arrow fletching, until everything smells of damp wool and cold earth. The road to the fortress has become a ribbon of black mud that swallows boots and wagon wheels alike. Each step is an argument with the ground. Each wheel turn a groan. Beyond the moat, the siege line circles the citadel like a scar, churned earth, splintered stakes, and ditches deep enough to bury a man's hope. Pikes bristle along the trench edges. Helms glint dully beneath the gray sky. The besiegers move in slow, disciplined patterns, their labor steady and methodical. They dig saps toward the curtain wall, inch by inch, wicker screens raised to catch arrows before they find flesh. Baskets of soil are passed hand to hand with the patient rhythm of men who believe time itself will eventually surrender. From the battlements, the defenders watch. They have grown used to this choreography of persistence. The enemy does not rage. It endures. And endurance, they know, can be more lethal than fury. In the shadow of the gatehouse, beneath stone darkened by centuries of smoke and rain, Renaud keeps the castle's ledger. He is not built for war. His hands are ink-stained, fingers narrow and precise. His shoulders sit lightly beneath a wool cloak patched at the elbows. He smells of parchment and wax, not of iron and sweat. Yet he understands something many armored men choose not to speak aloud. This fortress is not merely stone. It is law. On his desk lie charters sealed in brittle wax, toll rights for the bridge that spans the river beyond, oaths sworn over relics so old their origins are forgotten. Boundary stones planted in fields generations ago, their placement recorded in careful script. If the castle falls, it will not only be walls that crumble. The border will shift in courts, in taxes, in which tongue is spoken at market. It will shift in which saints' days are honored and which are dismissed, in whose men may seize a pig for unpaid dues, in which widow must kneel before which lord. Renaud dips his quill into ink thickened by damp and records dwindling grain stores, broken crossbows, the tally of wounded. Each number is a wound of its own. The siege has gnawed at the garrison's soul. Meat is salted so hard it must be chipped with a knife. The blades scraping against flesh turn nearly to wood. Ale has soured, tasting of vinegar and regret. In the chapel, frankincense ran out weeks ago. Now damp straw smolders in its place, smoke rising thin and bitter. Fever stalks the lower rooms. Coughs echo through corridors long after torches are extinguished. At night, through the thin walls of the gatehouse chamber, Renaud hears whispered confessions. Men naming sins they never expected to die with. Promises made in haste. Debts unpaid. The soft murmur of regret is more constant than the rain. He writes by candlelight while outside the enemy's saps creep closer. One morning, through the gray veil of rain, a rider appears in the besiegers' camp. Ordinary enough. Mud spattered. Cloak drawn tight. A messenger bearing orders from a distant lord. The seal on his parchment gleams briefly before vanishing beneath a tent flap. Renaud watches from the wall. He has trained his eye to notice absence as much as presence. A missing entry in an account. A line skipped in a charter. A coin uncollected. He sees it first in the movement of men. A shift in formation near the western trench. Helmets turning not toward the wall, but toward the distant road. Wagons creaking into motion. Units repositioned with quiet urgency. Below, the enemy commander reads the wax, frowns, and gestures sharply. Orders ripple outward. Forces peel away from the western sap, their withdrawal small, temporary, almost invisible amid the greater machinery of siege. To most, it is nothing. To Renaud, it is a missing line in an account. He hurries from the battlement to the captain's chamber, heart pounding, not from fear, but from certainty. They have thinned the western trench, he says, breath clouding in the cold air. Not abandoned, only shifted. But the pattern. The captain, scarred and hollow-eyed, studies him. You are certain? Renaud nods. As certain as I am when a column does not balance. A silence follows, heavy as rain. Then the captain calls for armor. At dusk, when the sky deepens into bruised purple and the rain slackens to a mist, the gate opens with a groan like an old beast waking from uneasy sleep. No fanfare, no banner raised high. The sortie surges forth into the narrow gap. Men crash into the half-man trench before the besiegers can reform their lines. Torches are flung into wicker screens. Pitch ignites with a hungry roar. Supply carts overturn in mud, their contents spilling like entrails. A crucial store of rope and resin, meant for ladders and engines, catches fire in a sudden blaze that pushes back the dusk. The enemy scrambles, pulled between returning forces and the chaos now blooming at their flank. Orders collide. Signals are misread. For a moment, discipline frays. By the time the western trench is reclaimed, it is scarred and smoking. Tools lie scattered. Baskets burned to ash. The careful rhythm of patient labor has been broken. By morning, the besiegers' ring is no longer seamless. They retreat a measured distance to regroup, their lines no longer pressed tight against the wall. The saps abandoned smolder in the damp earth like wounds refusing to close. From the battlements, the defenders watch the gap widen. The border, so close to being rewritten in mud and blood, holds. When silence finally settles, it feels fragile, like glass stretched thin across a winter pond. Renaud returns to his ledger. His hands tremble slightly as he steadies the page. He records the cost: 2 men dead, 5 wounded, a store of arrows spent. Ink pools heavier at the nib. Each letter seems weightier than before. He pauses and looks toward the charters stacked beside him. He thinks of the toll bridge and the markets, of saints' days and boundary stones, of whose language children will learn to pray in next spring. Kingdoms, he realizes, are altered not only by kings and banners. They are altered by misread letters, by urgent messages misunderstood, by commanders who shift forces to meet threats that never arrive, by brief absences, by small, overlooked moments. Outside, the rain finally ceases. A weak sun pierces the cloud, glinting off damp helms and shattered trench tools. Ravens descend to pick at what the night left behind. Renault closes the ledger and presses his palm against its worn leather cover. The fortress still stands. But he knows that the next letter, the next messenger, the next subtle withdrawal might not tilt in their favor. The border remains inked where it was, for now. And as the wind dries the mud into cracked earth and smoke thins into memory, Renault senses that history does not march in grand strides alone. Sometimes it slips through narrow gaps at dusk. Sometimes it waits in the space between two lines on a page. And somewhere beyond the valley, another rider is already on the road, bearing wax and parchment heavy enough to change everything.